Go. Well, hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. We are so thrilled to be able to share part of our 40-year anniversary with the Hunger Summits that have been planned, and this is the very first of those. And so, again, we're very excited to kick this off today. And so today is actually our 40th anniversary. So my name is Ken Estelle. I'm the president and CEO of Feeding America West Michigan, and we're going to get started. And I know if we could move the slide along, that would be helpful. Are you going to do that, Patty Jean?
Yep, we're gonna, we'd like to know who you're representing today. So I just launched the poll.
So if you see that on your screen, please check the appropriate box so we get an idea of who's here.
Okay, there you go.
So quite a mix between food bankers and agency partners and community partners. Well, thank you all for being part of our group today. If you don't know, other is a good place to go. So see that. All right. Like I said, my name's Ken Estelle. I'm the president and CEO of Feeding America West Michigan. And we have a pretty simple mission. At least it sounds simple on paper, not necessarily as simple to actually execute. But what we do is gather and distribute food to relieve hunger and increase food security in West Michigan and the Upper Peninsula. And although it's pretty easy to say, it's been quite a daunting mission, especially in this past year that we've all been through, which has been probably a very challenging year for any of us who are involved in helping our neighbors make sure they have enough to eat. So if we go to the next slide, just a bit of history on our organization. We were founded on this day, April 23, 1981, as Gleaners of West Michigan by Reverend Don Eddy, who was a pastor who saw food from farms that was on the side of the road or in the field that was just getting piled up. And he had the idea, well, we can glean that food and provide it to our friends. And so Reverend Eddy started that with the idea of gleaning food from farmers. In fact, carrots was the first crop, I believe, that he gleaned and shared with folks in need in the greater Grand Rapids area. In 1983, we joined what was then called America's Second Harvest, which is now obviously changed our name to Feeding America. And we changed our name to then Second Harvest Gleaners of West Michigan. In 1991, we finalized our 40 county service areas, and we'll get into that a little bit more in a few minutes. And in 1998, we held our first mobile pantry. That was the vision of my predecessor, John Arnold, who was a longtime food bank leader. And he was here. He had the idea of being able to bring food on a truck right out to community and distribute it directly to folks in need. And in those days, we used converted beverage trucks. We're supposed to call them beverage trucks now. I think John called them beer trucks, but actually the official name is beverage trucks. And we were able to do that starting in 1998. And now many food banks across the country have adopted a mobile distribution program that was basically started here in West Michigan. America's Second Harvest changed their name to Feeding America in 2009. We changed ours as well to Feeding America West Michigan Food Bank. And then our name was officially shortened in 2015 to just Feeding America West Michigan. Since that time, we've really worked on producing more health-based food, nutritious food on our mobiles. We've expanded our mobile distribution into the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, which is a large rural area. And we get to today, which marks the 40th year of our working to fight hunger with our partners in West Michigan. We go to the next slide. So a little bit more about where we work. Like I said, we serve 40 out of 83 counties in Michigan. Right now, like many places around the country, about 1 in 6 people are food insecure in this area. And unfortunately for us, that means about over 400,000 people and over 120,000 children. And so that is our real mission, to help make sure that each of those people have access to safe and healthy food through those 40 counties. So you can see on the slide, 33 of the 40 are rural counties, which are usually hard to reach communities. So we have a very rural focused service area for our food bank. Again, we cover about half of the state, a little over half the state geographically. And we are so thankful for the over 800 partners that work to make sure that food gets right to families. And those are food pantries and meal programs, shelters, mobile food partners that really help get that food into the hands of those families that need it. Our structure is I'm going to keep it on that prior slide just for one more minute. Thank you. We use 7 different partners. We're located in the greater Grand Rapids area on the west side of the Lower Peninsula. We have a branch warehouse in Benton Harbor down in the southwest corner. We have another branch in Cadillac, which serves a good part of the northwest part of the Upper Peninsula. We have a food rescue partner in Traverse City that helps us with rescuing food in that community. And we have a partner warehouse in Harbor Springs that hits that very top northwest corner of the Lower Peninsula. And then we also have a large food bank partner in Houghton, Hancock in the western part of the Upper Peninsula. So that's the structure of our work. So then if we go to the next slide, just a quick bit on 2020. Obviously, all of us have been through a really tough year. Again, if you're involved in fighting hunger and food insecurity, you know about this as well as anybody. I can tell you for our food bank, we saw a 64% increase just in the number of people attending mobile food pantries. And it looked like I just froze up.
You just froze up.
Okay, am I back now?
Yes.
Yes.
We can hear you, Ken.
Okay, am I back yet?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Our wonderful technology, we try to get through with it, but bear with us. I don't know exactly what's happening, but according to Patty Jean, you can still hear me at the moment, right? Okay. Yep. So again, I was saying 64% increase in our mobile pantry attendance. Over 580,000 people participated in that in 2020, and a large part of it was because so many of our food pantry partners had to limit or close their food pantries during the height of the pandemic. So the most productive way to get food to people was through the mobile food pantry program, where we did about 1,500, a little over 1,500 distributions. And a lot of them were significantly larger than what we had experienced in the past. Overall, just under 24 million meals to those that were struggling with hunger. So with that, what we're really here is we're here to hear Dr. Katie Martin share with us some of her experience. So I'd like to introduce Katie Martin to us today. She is Executive Director of the Institute for Hunger Research and Solutions at the Kinetic Food Bank Food Share. She's recognized as a thought leader on food security issues and has over 25 years experience in developing and evaluating holistic solutions to hunger. She earned her PhD in nutrition science and policy from Tufts University and has presented her work at dozens of regional and national conferences, and we are so happy to have her here today with us. Katie is married, she says she's a proud mom of 2 sons and currently blessed to be a host parent of an exchange student from Nigeria, which I think is very interesting. So the topic today is related to her new book that was just published in March. It's titled Reinventing Food Banks and Pantries, subtitled New Tools to End Hunger. And what an appropriate topic and book we have today. So just a warmest of welcomes. Katie, thank you for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you so much, and happy Friday, everyone. I am thrilled to be here with you all today. And first, I really want to say congratulations to the food bank and your whole network. 40 years of doing this work is really impressive. I know, I can speak from my vantage point working in our food bank. I don't know that any one of us, when we get into this work, would think we would be doing this work for 40 years, but here we are. And I also want to say a humongous thank you for having me here today, and also specifically to your food bank. Ken, you mentioned the mobile program that was started at Feeding America West Michigan. And when you say that it's been replicated by other food banks here in Connecticut, we absolutely modeled our mobile program exactly after what John Arnold started in your network. And our mobile program is one of our flagship programs here at the food bank. So I want to say thank you to you all for inspiring us. As Ken mentioned, I'm thrilled to tell you about my book, and I'm going to reference it quite a bit as we go through the presentation this morning. And I'm hoping you can put questions in the chat box, and Patty Jean can interrupt if we can go through in real time when you have questions based on what I'm describing. And hopefully we'll have some time at the end too to really dive into some questions. So this is a book that I wrote to talk about my experience over my whole career of focusing on food insecurity and the issue of hunger in our wealthy country of the United States of America. And the goal of the book is bold yet simple. It's to reinvent the way that we provide charitable food, from the way that we talk about our work to the programming that we do in our communities. And it's meant to be really inspirational. And that's my hope today during this hour, is to provide sparks of inspiration for you as you embark on this 40th year. And I also am hoping, particularly with COVID, that it gives you ideas of how we can emerge stronger and reinvent the way that we're doing our programs. And the book is also meant to be very action-oriented. At the end of every chapter, there are action steps that you can take today in your community. So we'll talk about some of those practical ideas also. If you're interested in ordering the book, you can go to Island Press. That's my publisher. If you put in my last name, Martin, you can get 20% off. I'll also tell you that today, they've been doing a sale this week on ebooks. So if you like your books electronically, they're selling the book for $4.99, so it's a steal. So let me tell you a little bit about my motivation for writing the book. When I was newly out of college, right after college, I chose an internship at the Food Bank for New York City. And this big picture on the left is a photo that I took that summer that I worked at the food bank. And it was my job to monitor food programs and agencies that were members of the food bank to make sure that they were complying with the food bank regulations. So you're probably familiar with those kind of site visits. And this particular food pantry just really stuck with me. And, it was an example of, clearly there was so much need for food. This was in Lower Manhattan. The line snaked around the corner. But as people got closer to the line, the food pantry was in the basement of the building, and the volunteers had pre-bagged the food, and they would hand it one to the next person, assembly line, up the steps onto the sidewalk, and then hand a bag of food to the individuals. And it wasn't very glamorous, and the people receiving the food were really appreciative of the food. But I just felt like there had to be a better way to tackle the problem of hunger. And then this image on the right, as you can imagine, is very recent. This is from COVID. And unfortunately, I feel like sometimes, this is 26 years later, and in many ways, not a whole lot has changed in our fundamental approach of providing charitable food. And one of the themes from my book is that we're doing really good work in food banks and food pantries. And I'll talk about a lot of innovative things that we should celebrate. But I also think there's room for improvement. There are many ways that we can do better. And I also want to give you some ideas and examples of how we can do that and how we can reinvent the way we do our work. So much of this work is about a paradigm shift. It is about getting out of our comfort zones where we feel safe and comfortable, and this is how we've always done it, and this is the way that we're always going to do it, to stepping outside of that comfort zone, which is often scary. You know, it makes us fear the unknown. We can be intimidated. And in that fear zone is when we can take on a notion of competition that particularly within nonprofit sectors, I think we can compete with one another if we're in a fear-based mentality, because we worry that if some other nonprofit or some other program gets funding, then we might not get enough funding. We stay in our, in that fear. When we step out of that and we have a notion of curiosity, of wanting to learn, wanting to understand more about the people we're serving, about our community, and about new approaches, that's when we can start to collaborate. We can be receptive to outside input, start problem solving, getting new skills. That's what leads us into the growth zone of really expanding our vision, thinking bigger than we have before, setting new and bigger goals for ourselves. Celebrating a huge milestone like a 40th anniversary is a really great time to go through this type of paradigm shift. The nice thing about one of the silver linings during this horrible, awful year of COVID is that we've all learned that we can get out of our comfort zones because we all had to, right? We've all had to stretch ourselves and to think differently about how we live our own personal lives and how we do our work professionally. So my hope is that you can think about the types of changes you've made during COVID and think of how you can extend that paradigm shift in the near future. So what holds us back from that visionary growth mentality? One of the themes that I talk about in my book, and one of the things that I have found has been resonating with people who read the book, is the idea of the scarcity mentality. And we often think about this for the people we serve. So if you're struggling with food insecurity, particularly if you're living in poverty, you're focused on a lack, that you don't have enough food, enough money to pay the rent, enough money to pay your bills at the end of the week. So you have coping strategies. You do lots of very tricky trade-off decisions, balancing whether to pay this bill over that bill. That makes a lot of sense when we think at the individual level. But I think what's really important for us at food banks and in food pantries is to realize that at the organizational level, we can also have a scarcity mentality. That, you know what, we'd like to try different things, but we don't have enough money. We don't have enough food. There isn't enough time. We don't have enough volunteers. I don't know that I've ever visited a food pantry that didn't say, we don't have enough space, right? Space is often a limiting factor, or so folks think that it is. And because there's so many people in need, particularly during COVID, you saw those numbers that Ken showed of just the dramatic increase in the number of people who need food. It's very tempting. It's very easy. It's very human nature to say we should just focus on giving people food. And we shouldn't, think too far ahead. We just have to get through today. We just need to serve the line. When we do this, we don't think as much strategically, and we typically don't evaluate the work that we do. This keeps us stuck in this emergency food mentality of feeling like this is an emergency, that people don't have enough food, and so we just need to try to provide food as quickly as possible to as many people as possible. What's interesting to me is that before COVID, this terminology of emergency food was still very common. And in fact, even without the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, we often refer to ourselves as the emergency food system, emergency food programs. But I would encourage you to reinvent that notion, because We've been doing this work. You all have been doing this work for 40 years. Most food banks around the country have been operating for about 40 years. The people that we serve are coming routinely to our programs for food. So it's hard to think of how that's a true emergency. This is a chronic problem. So we need to change the way that we describe the work that we do and the way that we do our work so we can move away from an emergency short-term response towards empowerment. The way that we can make that shift from scarcity is a focus on abundance. We can think about this certainly in the way that we think about the people we serve. Of course, they have needs. Of course, they have struggles and challenges, but they also have strengths, they have hopes, they have dreams, they have assets that they can share. At the organizational level, yes, we all have challenges. There are all things that we would like to improve with our programs, but we need to think about the strengths and the assets of our organizations and our communities. So if we focus on not having enough, we may not have enough individually. But if we partner and collaborate with others in our community, we can probably pool resources and have a bigger impact for the people that we serve. That's how we get out of our comfort zone, get into that growth mentality. And when we work collectively together, we can build a bigger impact. This image here is from a really terrific food pantry in El Paso, Texas. And if you think about the language and the signage and the viewpoint, when you walk into the food pantry, it says, "Welcome to your fresh start." Think about how that makes you feel. It's definitely a shift towards a strength-based mentality. I think the way we define a problem helps define our solutions to the problem. So if we define the problem of hunger in Western Michigan or in the US as not enough food, right? It makes sense that people are struggling with food insecurity because they don't have enough food for their family. Then our solution can become very simple. We need to collect and distribute more food. And we as a nation, as a network, have done a really, really terrific job of that. We have collected and distributed billions of pounds of food to millions of Americans. And yet, the problem of food insecurity is a persistent, chronic problem. If, on the other hand, we define the problem as rooted in poverty and more about the fact that we've had a stagnant minimum wage, that folks are often employed, but they're working 2 or 3 jobs without benefits, they're underemployed, that there's a lack of healthy food within communities, there's a lack of affordable healthcare, housing, childcare, transportation, etc. If we focus on the fact that there's food insecurity in America because there are systemic inequalities and structural racism, these are root causes of hunger in America. And if we shed a light on these underlying issues, then our solutions become more complex, they become messier, but they also hopefully become more holistic and coordinated because no one of us can tackle these underlying issues on our own. And I think for a long time as food banks and food pantries, we thought, sure, we understand these root causes, but they're too big, they're too hard for us to do. We should just focus on providing enough food. But I would encourage us to think bigger than that we can't probably tackle them all on our own or all at once, but there's a lot we can do to move the needle. So one of the questions that we want to pose is around client choice. And I'd like you to think about before COVID. I'm curious for you all, and Patty Jean, if you can pull this up, is...
No, Katie, the poll is not coming up.
Okay. All right. Then we won't worry about it. I'm always curious. Client choice is something that I I'm very passionate about. And I know that was one of the first things that had to go because of the pandemic. So I'm curious of how folks have approached client choice and how you're doing now, but we'll keep moving along. So as we think about this paradigm shift, this is work that I have been developing and tweaking and learning about over the last decade or so. It is a movement towards building the capacity in food pantries and other meal programs to more effectively address those complex root causes of food insecurity. And the way that we describe this is through our 3 C's, and it's choice, culture, and connection. So it's my firm belief that allowing people to choose their food like they would at a grocery store is a much more dignified, empowering, welcoming way to offer charitable food. And again, I totally understand that that had to take a backseat because of public health precautions. I'm hopeful that many of you who had been using client choice before are hoping to start reintroducing that. And if you had been thinking about moving to client choice before the pandemic and you've had to reconfigure the way that you design your program, I'm also really hopeful this would be a great time as you start to bring people back into your programs to allow people to choose their food with dignity. In the middle here, this picture of culture, this is when you think about how does it feel when you walk into a food pantry? How does it make you feel when you come in? There are a lot of things that we can do to emphasize customer service, hospitality, so that we can reduce the stigma of asking for help. And connection can take on different approaches. Connection is about building relationships with individuals that we serve, the customers, the guests that come to our programs, so that we can connect them with other community programs and services. It's also about connecting with other agencies and organizations. And this paradigm is really rooted in my belief that it takes more than food to end hunger. I'm going to give you a lot of different tangible ideas and examples that hopefully as you think about reinventing yourselves and things that you could do, here are some suggestions. So if you're wanting to focus on health and nutrition, we have this great stoplight system called SWAP, which is supporting wellness at pantries, that ranks food nutritionally based on 3 nutrients of saturated fat, sodium, and sugar. And it's meant to be really simple and intuitive, and ways to create nudges to encourage people to select healthy food. And the goal is to increase both the demand for healthy food through nutrition education, but also improving the supply of healthy food. So we can share this with our food donors and community groups that want to do a food drive, is letting them know what type of food that we would really like to encourage to support the health and well-being of the people that we serve.
Katie, are there resources available for SWAP if someone wanted to implement that?
Yeah, and on my last slide, I will share with you my contact information through our institute. If you go to foodshare.org/institute, there's a whole page on SWAP, and I'll give you my email address. We're happy to share information. We're working with food banks and food pantries around the country to help use SWAP. It's a great tool, so absolutely. And then I'm going to go through several different examples of what other food banks around the country are doing and some food pantries are doing around the country. And again, my hope is to try not to get intimidated, but hopefully be inspired, is to think and to hopefully pat yourself on the back when you say, yeah, we're doing a lot of these cool things. This looks like my pantry. There's a lot to celebrate. And there are a lot of different ideas that you can hopefully take back into your local communities. This is a great example from the Food Bank of Southeastern Virginia. They have partnered with a local community college. Many community colleges and universities have recognized that many of their students are struggling with food insecurity. And rather than having a discrete food pantry in a back corner so that no one knows that you're getting food and that you're food insecure, they've created this beautiful, look at this beautiful mixed use space that has healthy food, but also other resources to help connect people with other services. They have wellness workshops, and they're hoping to provide other wraparound services too. Speaking of wraparound services, this is more at a food pantry level. If you can think about how you could create some space for a resource center so that people, and the idea of rather than just providing brochures or a referral, doing more warm referrals where you can sit with an individual, a guest, and identify what are the issues that they're working on, and then provide access, go online and maybe set up an appointment with that program, having computer space, printers for people to search for jobs, work on their resume, and also having space in your food pantry to offer classes or workshops on site to make it kind of one-stop shopping. And that's exactly what the Second Harvest North Central Food Bank in Minnesota has done, to think about how they can expand the services for people beyond just food. So they've got this, really nice, pretty food pantry with fresh produce, but then they're also helping to provide SNAP referrals, do diabetes prevention programs, voter registration, and again, thinking outside of the box of what opportunities there might be within your food pantry to provide additional resources. The other thing that I really love is that they've created a participant advisory committee. So how will we know what types of programs and services people are looking for? Well, ask them and have them involved, engage them, and have them be leaders, not only for their own families, but hopefully for their community so that they can advocate for other changes.
Katie, two questions. One, going back on the SWAP model, it says when you say you have the SWAP program, could you define who you is?
Yes.
Is it the Food Institute?
Yeah. So through Food Share, which is the food bank that I work at, which was recently merged with Connecticut Food Bank, so we're soon going to have a new name. But if you go to foodshare.org/institute, or my email, kmartin@foodshare.org, and we'll get all this information to you. So,
and then the second question is addressing choice, connection, and culture.
yep.
The New Heights CCDA in Benton Township offers a food co-op with a nominal fee. Members sort and distribute food to each other. I'd love comments on this model.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I think it's a really innovative thing. I've heard of a few models like this. I think it really helps to reduce that stigma of charity, that many people choose not to come to our programs because they feel like they don't want to have to rely on charity. I think there are a lot of different ways that we can improve that culture to make it feel more dignified. And one way is to say, pay what you can, right? Or have a nominal fee that it makes people feel like they're not just getting a handout. So, part of the challenge is, as part of the Feeding America network, with food banks and our member programs, with the food that is donated to us, we cannot sell that for a charge. So there are some, you have to think creatively of how you could do that with other purchased products. So, but there are absolutely ways to do this. Yeah.
Okay, there's another question. What do you suggest to keep systems like SWAP from perpetuating inequitable power dynamics? Would you encourage a nonprofit using SWAP to apply similar standards to their own events for staff, donors, board members, etc.?
I love that. Yeah, and I'll say the power dynamic, that's, to me, a big part of that. It starts with choice. So if there is a physical wall, or there's a clear division between the giver versus the receiver, I think it reinforces that power dynamic of us versus them. So client choice is huge. And Another key thing here is the red does not mean no. We always want to be careful that we're not shaming people for their food choices. We all like red food sometimes. That's why I love I worked with a graphic design company that came up with this logo. We all love a donut sometimes, right? Or some treat. It's recognizing that's not something you want to eat often. I love the idea. Swap is really for all of us. It is very transparent, so you can identify what foods are green, yellow, and red. I have changed the way that I shop for food for my family. Other food banks have used it in their break room, on their vending machines. There's so many different ways that you can use this. So yes, this is not just for low-income, food insecure families. This is for all of us to make healthier choices.
And another question is, are there stats on the success of the programs you are highlighting, i.e. participant advisory committee? Is that done via Zoom, and do people stick with it?
That's a great question. You know, I'm not as familiar with, I don't know, for example, from North Central Food Bank in Minnesota, how they've done that. I will say there are a number of groups that I've talked to recently that are doing some type of advisory group, leadership council, different ways to engage people with lived experience of hunger. I think it can take many different forms. And I would say that would be typically something that would lean less around evaluation as much as using that to inform the work that you do. Certainly during COVID, we've all become more familiar with Zoom. And I think there are a lot of ways that we can use that to our advantage to meet with people where they are. And, people can, it's a little bit more flexible, but I think over time, there's definitely benefit in having a sense of community, of being together. Does that help? And we've conducted research on our SWAP system and our More Than Food program. We have evidence to show that they make significant impacts, and we have other research on that too. Love these questions. I'm just going to fly through a few more, but keep the questions coming because this is really for your group. This is another example of a food pantry, the Johnny Cake Center in Rhode Island. And these are the types of services that they have provided. And the woman who does a lot of this work, she said that 5 years ago, if you told her she would be doing these kinds of programs and services, she probably wouldn't have believed you. And the cool thing here is the asterisks all involve community partnerships. So they don't do all of these on their own at the food pantry, but these are the types of the services that they are offering. Feeding Northeast Florida has found ways to build conversations with neighbors in their communities to really engage them as community partners, co-creating solutions. So that's the whole idea of like having an advisory council or a leadership group to engage the people that you serve, not just to fill out a survey, but really have them involved to understand what types of services would they want at the food pantry or at the food bank. So they've offered flu vaccines, COVID testing. They've participated in race talks. So, right, if we recognize that structural racism is a root cause of hunger, many of us would say, well, gosh, I wouldn't even know where to start to tackle that. What do we do? Let's start talking about it. I think that's a huge step. And building those community conversations to highlight how systemic and structural racism makes it harder for certain groups to have access to healthy food, jobs, housing, etc. Another really cool example from Atlanta Community Food Bank, they have a Food First program. And the notion here is, we know that most food pantries set limits on how frequently people come to get food, how often they can come to a food pantry. With the Food First model, they say, what if we just take that away and let people come more frequently to the food pantry so that they don't have as many hard trade-off decisions? Am I going to pay for food or am I going to pay for my other bills? if they don't have to worry about getting enough food, these are some of the wonderful statistics that they have found, that you make fewer trade-off decisions, you have the better ability to pay bills, etc. So a lot of innovative ideas of what other food pantries and food banks are doing.
So we have one comment from a panel or a participant, and she says that the MSU extension could offer many services to the pantry participants that were listed here.
Awesome. Yeah. And you may be thinking to yourself, but those sound really cool, but we don't have the space, we don't have the time. Again, remember, that's the scarcity mentality. Think to yourself, could you partner with someone else that may have space? Could you encourage the folks that come to your food pantry to go down the street to a program or organization that offers those? Or maybe you say, wow, we just hadn't thought about these yet, and these are things that we could start to offer in our programs. That's awesome. Here's an example of, again, this is in El Paso. They've created this Fresh Start program based on a model in Hartford, Connecticut. They provide coaching. They work with members over 6 to 9 months, and then they celebrate with graduation ceremonies. And it's just the most inspiring, amazing thing. So as you think about providing some wraparound services and helping to engage people in your work, how might you celebrate their successes? How might you help them to graduate out of your line so that they hopefully don't need to keep coming back on a chronic basis to get food? Maybe they come back and volunteer sometimes. Maybe they come and run a workshop or a class.
So this question is, I think, both to Ken and Katie. There's two of them. One is, how do you get more green foods? And the second question is, can we get produce boxes through Feeding America to offer more green choices?
Mm-hmm. So I'll start with getting more green foods. I think it helps as you start using the swap system. You can see within your food bank or your food pantry where you're already doing great, like what food groups or what areas do you already have a lot of green food, and then what are areas that you need help with. So for example, let's say soup. Most every food pantry and food bank, you're going to have a lot of donated canned soup. If most of your soup is high in sodium and saturated fat and it's predominantly red, how might you solicit more donations of yellow and green soup, for example? So again, SWAP is great to provide education for the guests and customers who are coming to the food pantry. You can also use that information and the nutrient guidelines to talk with your food donors. At the food bank level, you can use that as you're soliciting donations from your manufacturers, the food producers, from your grocery stores that donate to your food bank. At the food pantry level, if someone's hoping to do a food drive for you, you can tell them specifically the types of food that you're looking for, and ideally, what your customers are asking for. Ken, I don't know if you have other things you want to add on that.
Yeah, I think just in terms of what we're doing and how we, what we can do to get more green food, produce, to food pantries. Again, a lot of our produce goes to the mobile food program, but we are asking food pantries if they have specific produce requests or would dislike it, that we have a way of putting that information on on their ordering when we have an online ordering system. So where we can, if you are a pantry and you say, hey, we'd like to get more produce from Feeding America West Michigan, but it's not on your ordering list, we're asking that you put that in the notes field in our order, and our team tries, if we have that available, we'll do our best to try to get that produce to any of the pantries that have requested that. And it's gotten a little more difficult with the COVID activity because we don't have a produce shopping area open anymore, which makes things a little more difficult for folks. So we are trying to do that, and we'll continue to try to make more of that produce available.
Yeah. And I would say too, if you haven't provided fresh produce before at your food pantry, usually you're going to need some equipment. You're probably going to need a refrigerator, some shelving, some other display cases. And I would really encourage you, there are donors, there are funders that will totally understand if you frame it, that you're not just providing basic needs in your community. You're not just providing calories. You are helping to promote health, reduce health disparities, prevent chronic diseases. You can engage new types of donors and funders who would help support your work. So yes, it takes more resources. It takes more energy. If you've got fresh produce coming in, you've got to have volunteers who are willing to work with fresh produce and, sort that out. There's more work to be involved, but there's so much other benefit and potential new donors and funders and supporters.
So speaking of funding, Katie, we have a question about what are the funding sources for the programs that you have been describing?
Any and all things that you might imagine. So it can be from local community foundations. Those are often great places to start. Most local communities will have a community foundation. If you haven't worked with them before, I would encourage you. The nice thing about a community foundation is you can have conversations with them. You can build relationships and let them know what you're doing. And they may think to themselves, okay, you're a food pantry and you're providing basic needs. Help educate them on the cool new stuff that you're doing, what you're dreaming of, what types of changes you want to make within your programming, and engage them for new funding. It can be from individual donors. It can also be from corporate sponsors in your area, health foundations. I mean, it kind of depends on the initiatives that you're taking on. But I think when we've considered ourselves in blinders of, we're providing charitable, we're providing emergency food, it often limits the scope of the types of partnerships and funding sources that we might engage with. And I would tell you that, there are many other opportunities to find new funders as you grow the types of programs that you're doing. These are some of the themes from my book, and certainly, as you can tell, what I would hope that you take away from today is we threw a lot of information at you. There are lots of examples and information and different things. Try not to get intimidated. Just get started. Take one step. What is one component of the work that you do where you feel like you're ready for the next step? Start there, and don't worry that you don't have all the pieces together or you don't have all the answers yet. Work with other people to, figure out who else you could partner with, because as we think about the bigger goals that we want to have, we really want to help people not just be, able to get food for a few days. My vision is to help them to be food secure so they don't have to keep coming back to our services, and so that they can thrive and live their best lives and not worry and stress about where they're getting their food. That's a big goal, right? It requires big changes. So we've got to think differently about how we've done it. And if not now, with everything we've learned from COVID, celebrating a 40th year anniversary doing this work, if not now, when? If not you've been doing this work in your community. Your boots on the ground. You know your community well. You're engaged with the work that you're doing. Who else can step in? This is the perfect time to do this work. Just a little bit of information on our institute. I would encourage you, I don't know if you can see the bottom of my screen here, but I would encourage you to subscribe to our institute. It's just foodshare.org/institute, and you can subscribe for free to get our monthly newsletters. We have updates, we have information, and we have monthly webinar series where we talk all about SWAP and More Than Food and other initiatives. So subscribe. And then here's my contact information.
Katie, I have another question.
Yeah.
It says, besides the obvious benefits to people seeking food assistance of a pantry being open more frequently, have you observed a relationship between pantry hours and being able to effectively handle fresh produce and similar perishables?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think it's ideal when a food pantry is open multiple days a week, and hopefully with some different, not just 9 to 5 hours, but maybe one day a week you're open on the evening or on a weekend. But in terms of fresh produce specifically, you want to think strategically of like when do you get either pickups from the food bank or when you get deliveries. I'm not exactly sure how you all do that, but when you get food from the food bank, or if you work with, let's say, grocery stores. I don't know if you guys do Meal Connect or Retail Rescue where you get food directly from your grocery stores. Think about the timing of that. So you want to think about getting your produce in-house like the afternoon before or the morning of your distribution day so that it can be as fresh as possible. Another thing to think about is very often food pantries put limits on how many food items people can select. So you can take, 1 can of peanut butter based on your family size, 2 cans of soup, etc. If you start bringing in fresh produce, you want to make sure that everyone who's shopping has access to it. But if you're going to be closing soon, you want to try to get rid of your produce in a timely fashion as well. You're going to need to think about your trash pickup, and there are some different considerations when you're using fresh produce as compared to just non-perishables.
We've had one attendee say that she has a small town and a summer farmers market, and she goes at the end of the day to get all the leftovers to give to her pantry.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have another question that asks, how do you suggest we build more volunteers, and how many volunteers are needed to run a food pantry program, classes, and clothing?
Yeah. So, one thing that I talk about in my book a bit is, when you've seen one food pantry, you've seen one food pantry. We all run the food pantries differently. There are certainly best practices. If you're not already engaging some of your guests, the clients who come to your food pantry to potentially volunteer, I would suggest you start there, is to engage the people who are coming to get food to see if they would want to donate their time, resources, talent, energy to help out at the food pantry. There are best practices with that as well. I think as you expand the work that you do, again, I would encourage you to reach out to other groups within your community. Not everybody gets super excited about just sorting canned food. So if you're framing your volunteer opportunities as focused only on food, you're going to get a group of people who are passionate about that. But if you expand to think about what other opportunities could people engage with, how could they share their talents and resources in other ways at your food pantry, you're likely to engage different volunteers. And again, that comes into like the way you describe your programs, the language that you use. There are many, many people who want to give back, who want to volunteer. You probably have seen this with COVID. Initially, there was a huge drop off in people who could volunteer and our ability to take volunteers. But then people came out of the woodwork, because they recognize there are people in the community who need help. So think about other people you might engage.
And then we have another question on a different subject. It says, can you talk about food banks' power to tell large donors that they only want donations from businesses that pay a livable wage?
Oh, I love that question. I thought you were going to focus on, like more the nutrition aspect, but ooh, living wage, that's great. You know, I think there are opportunities to do that. I think it depends on your leadership and the types of policies that you want to advocate. You know, I always think of the Oregon Food Bank is you know, my role model for a lot of the really progressive work that they have done of, you know, holding their donors accountable for different things. You know, I think you want to be consistent. I think it's a great approach of saying, if we really want to tackle food insecurity head on, we need the business community to step up and pay livable wages. And how does that trickle down into donations and other fields? I think there's a lot of room for growth there.
Katie, we have one comment that says the newsletter link is not working.
Well, that's not good.
Can you type in the chat maybe?
To get the newsletter?
Yeah. Or is there another way of getting it?
Yeah. If you're having trouble with that, you could send me an email. And part of it is with our merger with our two food banks, we're integrating all kinds of systems. We just upgraded our email this morning, and my email wasn't working for a little bit, but it's back up. It's possible that our website also is going through some reconstruction, but my email should work at kmartin@foodshare.org. And I will check on the newsletter link and to subscribe. It should say like subscribe to the Institute where you can get our newsletter, but I will check on that if it's not. And I'm looking, there's other questions in the Q&A.
It says page not found. There must be something going on with your integration.
It could be, yeah. So bear with us, but check back soon. I will check. And if you email me, I'm sure we can get you set up. Yeah, talk about food banks. Most people accept online donations. These are wonderful questions. I love the energy and the interest that everyone has, and hopefully you're feeling inspired and have some key ideas. The other thing I would encourage you all to do is share your best practices. So I've given ideas and examples from some other food banks and pantries. I certainly don't have all the answers. And it's always great to hear the innovative stuff that other people have tried and the different ways that you're doing it. And I would encourage you to share that within your community, share that within your food bank network, with others within the Feeding America network, because that's how we're all going to grow and learn, right?
Okay, that's it for questions, and we're actually at 11:01.
That's pretty impressive, huh?
Okay, wait, we have one more question. It says, what's your advice on proposing some of these changes to leadership? Just went away.
Yeah, I see it. It's a great question. So leadership that only sees things in terms of cost, I would say a couple things. I always start with the why. Why do you want to make changes? Why is this important? And you know, you can use some of the information and data that I've shared here, go back to your own, like, why are you proposing the changes? And then I would suggest to you that there are new funding streams available for this innovative work. I think many of our donors and funders are getting a little tired of providing money for the same thing. When we say we're providing more food to more people, and they say, well, we've been supporting you to do that for a lot of years. I think you're going to engage new donors. So one argument is to say, do we want to bring in more money to our program? Would you like to have more money coming in? The new types of programs, especially when you can show that they're evidence-based and that there's demand for it within the community, you're going to bring in new funders too. Ken, do you have any suggestion for how to make organizational change?
That's always challenging, and we've gone through some things here. Part of it is just being courageous to do it in some cases. A lot of times your initial comments of, well, we haven't, all the reasons why some things won't work, and we kind of focus on that. Good ideas take courage, and so I encourage us to, where we have good ideas, to have the rationale behind why it's a good idea and have the courage to step out and do it. Sometimes piloting a change is a good way to start, where you can prove its concept without maybe going crazy with a change. But that would be my advice.
I think that's a very good one. And the other thing too is I think when you propose really big changes, some people may choose not to come along. And I think that's okay too. You have to be willing to maybe have a volunteer who says this new direction isn't for me. You're likely going to bring in new folks who get excited about your courageous, bigger dreams.
But I just want to say thank you, Katie, for your spending time with us today. We just so appreciate your book and your insights, and in a lot of cases, the confirmation of things we are doing today, and challenging us to think about some things that we have not done yet. So thank you so much for spending the time with us, and Patty Jean for organizing and getting this together. I don't know if there's any other questions. I just think we'll wrap it up for today, and it's just been a real pleasure. So thank you all for participating today.
Yes. Thank you very much. We look forward to everyone joining us on our next Hunger Summit.
All right.
Thank you for having me, and congratulations again.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.